thanks everybody for joining. This is the first edition of a new like meetup slash podcast that we will try to do on a sort of bi-weekly schedule at the beginning. And the purpose is take a look at the applications of effect in real world projects and to speak about interesting technologies and interesting ideas that we generally have. And for today, we have here Johannes. Johannes has built a content layer, which is a really nice tool that is going to talk and is going to have a little bit of a demo. Keep in mind live coding, so everything might go wrong. And he has used effect behind the scenes to build up Contentlayer as a sort of first open source project where effect is consumed almost as a transitive dependency. So it's not really targeting an effect audience, but it's more targeting the broader JavaScript and TypeScript ecosystem, which I believe it's very interesting. So I'll hand over to Johannes to say his part and welcome everybody to Effect Time.
All right, thanks, Michael. Yeah, welcome everyone in the live stream and on YouTube. Before speaking more about effects and Contentlayer, just a little background on me. I've been diving really deep in dev tools for quite a while, both on the using dev tools, and then sometimes I'm drifting into building dev tools if I'm unhappy with the things I've been using in the past. And so roughly 6 years ago, I started a company back then was called GraphCool. Now it's called Prisma, where we're building database tools. So I've been co-founding this company roughly 6 years ago. Last year, I decided to take a bit of a step back since I was really itching to get my own hands dirty again, and was working since then like on various projects, helping other startups. Yeah, somehow found my way into the Effect.ts community, and was kindly welcomed by Michael, as so many others. And yeah, I was really intrigued about functional programming for quite a while. I've been using Haskell and Scala in the past, and but always kind of came back to the web, and big fan of TypeScript. And I wanted to see, hey, can there be like TypeScript and functional programming? Can we have both of these together? And Effect.ts seems to be the most promising technology foundation really for that. And I've been blown away with yeah, what this gives me. And I've been describing it to friends that there's like been few technologies that are as clear to me as like a big leap forward in various aspects, similar to how I would describe the benefit of going from jQuery to React, or from JavaScript to TypeScript. I think having learned Effect, and even though it's not as easy to learn right now, but having gone through learning it, I really get like a similar value benefit. And I've been using it in various projects, and one of these projects is called Contentlayer, which is by now also open source. That's one of the little projects I'm working on. I'm working on it on behalf of another startup I'm advising called Stackbit. They're building a very interesting website builder, but for developers. And I'll tell you more about it in a second. But yeah, so the way how I thought about this talk, conversation, presentation, live debugging session, whatever it will end up being, is that I'll start off with giving a little demo of what Contentlayer is. Also, before that, motivate what Contentlayer is trying to solve. And then, as you understand what it's doing, trying to take you behind the scenes into actually looking into the code base as an example of kind of like a real world application where Effect.js is used. And a disclaimer already, I've probably made many mistakes in using Effect.js, and there are probably much better ways to use Effect. And I hope Michael can point these out to me in this very public manner. So this is, I guess, what people refer to as like learn in public right here live. And yeah, then let's see where the session takes us. I have a few ideas where I think things could be improved, but yeah. So let's get started. So Contentlayer is a tool that helps you work with content. So let's say you're building a site with Next.js, next.js.org. Next is a great site framework, app framework, but it leaves a lot of the things you need to do still up to the developer, as opposed to something like Gatsby, which is much more like a full framework, which takes care of like many things for you, but also there's a lot more that you need to learn, has a few other disadvantages. So it's with things always, it's a trade-off. It depends. I find myself reaching for Next.js for almost all my web projects, but in Next.js, then it's a question of like, hey, how do I deal with content? So by content, I mean content that might live as markdown files, MDX files, but might also be content that lives in a headless CMS like Contentful, etc. And when you're using Next or a similar framework, it's basically up to you to wire everything up. I've had to do this a bunch of times with various projects, and I thought, hey, there has to be a better way, and that has led to Contentlayer. So there's few sites that are already using Contentlayer today. So for example, Graph CMS, which is a headless CMS itself, they're using Contentlayer for their docs. Lee Robinson, who's working at Vercel. This page is actually backed by Contentlayer. So if you're like going on a specific, like for example, on a blog post by Lee, or like all of this content is written in MDX and fed into Next.js through MDX. Through Contentlayer. So here, for example, when we're looking at the source of this, this is using Contentlayer. So all of this content here in the blog.
The funny thing is that behind the scenes here, Effect is used as a transitive dependency, which is also the reason why the amount of usage on the repository in Effect.js is kind of growing progressively more and more, with repositories that have nothing to do with Effect.
That is a great point. Let's see, Effect TS. Maybe I got the path wrong. Let's see how this is growing. Yeah, I suspect a decent number of usage is contributed by Contentlayer. I'll get to that in a second. But so I just wanted to point out, like here, this content that's powering this website is actually just Markdown, MDX, and Contentlayer takes care of providing this. So I'll show this to you as a smaller example. So here I've booted up Gitpod. Gitpod is an alternative to GitHub Codespaces, which is free to use and really awesome. So this is what I'm gonna use here. And this is just loaded up this repository in VS Code in the browser. So, and this repository has a folder of examples. So here's, for example, a example about MDX. So I'm currently in this directory, and I'll just be firing up next.dev. I'll open this in the browser. Let me put this next to each other. So let's see what's going on here. Again, just going to demo Contentlayer that you have an idea of what it's doing. And then we'll do what I guess most of us are here for, is like, hey, let's look at some effect code. So what is going on here? So here we have a very minimal page, has like a little navigation, hello world.
Just 1 second. Can everybody see the font size correctly? Because I'm seeing some messages coming up. Okay. Yes. Okay. Everybody's fine. I'm using interpreted a message font.
All right. Cool. So yeah, various like sub pages here. Here's like a sub page. Here's a sub page. The content. So this is a very minimal example. The content of this comes from here. So here's like this index MDX file. Let's say we want to change this and say, hey, effect. I'll save this, and this live reloads. Live reloading is, for example, one of the features of Contentlayer. And
can I ask one thing?
Yes, absolutely.
I see a button there with title click me. That doesn't seem to be standard HTML. Is that a React component?
So that might be an entirely different conversation. This is using MDX. Contentlayer supports both Markdown and MDX. MDX is basically Markdown as a foundation, and then it supports importing React components.
Okay.
So Markdown itself supports HTML, and this basically takes it to the next level and supports React components. So you thought, okay, button, that's not valid HTML. So the way how MDX is used, and we'll see that here, is that you can have React components, and you wire them up like this. So this is the content. You saw content live reloading. And so now it's a matter of like, the point of Contentlayer is making it easy to let developers use the content, transform it in a way that you can easily use it in your Next.js app or in your other whatever framework you're using. And all that Contentlayer does is here you pointed to where does the content live. So here we're using a local source with source files, but could also be source Contentful, source Notion, whatever will be supported at some point. Contentful is already supported. And what Contentlayer then does, which runs as part of your Next dev server, is that it puts here into this .contentlayer folder. It has here like beta. It basically turns all of your content files conveniently into JSON files, and these JSON files is something that your Next.js app can actually deal with. So this is what we're seeing here. Here we're saying, give me all the docs we just imported from here, and this is something then our Next.js app can deal with. So here,
we have access to those documents in a typed manner.
Exactly. So we're getting the content transformed into data, and for convenience for people who use TypeScript, I guess most of us here are using TypeScript, we get even types for that content. So specifically, when we look at this index MDX JSON side by side with the Markdown source or the index source, we see, okay, title, body, and we even get the body pre-processed in a way that React has an easier time dealing with it. And yeah, so, and then we're basically, let's put this away again. Let's briefly understand how this works. So we're first generating all the paths. The paths is that Next.js understands root is this is like sub A and so on. This is how we're dealing with the paths, very simple. And then get static props for a given path. We're fetching the right docs. All docs is just an array. It's just like a JSON array of documents. We're finding the right one and then passing it back. We're also building this little helper thingy nav info, which is like all the routes here. And then we're basically just passing this over to this React component where we see here doc. And the great thing here is with the stock, we get, as Michael pointed out, we get type safety here. We see title, we see type, all of that. And yep, this works with MDX, etc. So just pointing out a few more neat features about this. One of it is like the overall developer experience. Like I've tried to make this as nice as possible to use with like type safe, etc. Live reload. Another of it is validation. So you see here as part of the dev server.
The live reload is also on the MDX files and whatever content you link into.
Exactly. So it actually
nice.
uses the live reload infrastructure from Next.js or what framework you're using. So since this is...
What are you doing? You're running basically a compiler on the side where you're updating.
Exactly. So there's like a little live watcher that basically watches your content as it changes. It updates that JSON, and because it's just JSON, Next.js can understand that and automatically deals with it. So when we're changing this to Hello World 2, notice that sometimes here actually VS Code has a harder time live reloading. I think you need to switch the tab once, and so this automatically live reloads. And yeah, but even more than that, there's also validation. So let's say we have a extra field hi. This will even give us a warning, hey, saying like, hey, we don't know this. We haven't configured this here. We could also have like another field like subtitle type string, and let's say we make it required. Then this would actually even complain and saying like, hey, we're missing these required fields for 3 documents. You saw now that these documents are no longer there, that fails. We can remove this again, and then this should work again. So bunch of little features. The other thing that I wanted to point out is speed and performance. As I mentioned initially, I've been using Gatsby in the past, and I think it's great technology, but it does a lot, and that comes at the cost of speed or like slow performance sometimes. So just for fun of it, I tried to also check out the entire Gatsby docs, which I think takes in the order of like 20 or 30 minutes to build in here. And just running Contentlayer over it. So yarn Contentlayer build, that should take in the order of seconds. Let's give it a second. There we go. So this now like ran through the entire content. I think that took like now 10 seconds or so. Like you can add another 30 seconds for the Next.js build. So you stay in the realm of like a minute instead of like half an hour, which again, it's kind of an unfair comparison because it does a lot less. But if you need less, I think it's a good tool. Anyway, let's look into how Contentlayer actually works. Unless someone who is currently listening and watching has a question about what Contentlayer is doing.
I think there was a question in the chat, and it was around hot module replacement. Just to be clear, you're not interacting in any way with hot module replacement. You're just replacing files on file system, and those are picked up by the framework.
Exactly. In that regard, it's simple and elegant, I think.
It's a handover to the framework side, basically, to manage that.
The only thing that that's really is done here, that's where we need to help Next.js a little bit, and this is in the form of a here as a Next.js plugin. So the only thing that this really does here is with Contentlayer is it tells Webpack to, by default, Webpack doesn't watch for changes in node modules. However, Contentlayer is generating these JSON files into, like you see it here, there's actually just a sym link to node modules on Contentlayer. And this is where we're importing it from. And so that Next.js or Webpack specifically is still watching for changes going on in there. This is really the only thing this does additionally to like running this little dev server. But there's like additionally, there's no magic. It just like very, very simple. Sorry, I think you had a question.
Yeah, my other question is hot module. I'm not sure how it's called, updating, like not replacement, but updating it. And that would be Webpack's job as well then.
Exactly.
I guess.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
cool. And my other question was breakpoints. That was at the beginning, and when you were talking about markup files. So there is no CSS involved. So how is breakpoint management done when I want to switch to a smaller screen? Let's say the smallest possible screen,
is completely
like Apple Watch, for example.
This is completely decoupled. So Contentlayer, as the name might already suggest, just is concerned with the content. And typically, I think it's some people use MDX. I haven't seen it as much. I think typically you're rather just like looking at simple markdown file, which is markdown files, which is just content. And then that content is just then turned into data. And the same way as like data in the database isn't really concerned with styling, but that's like where like in your React front-end layer.
But to be clear, using MDX, I think it gives you a little bit more of a syntax DSL on your content. I imagine if you have like a blog post, you're gonna have images and you want to use standard components for those, so you can pass it down from React, but then it's styling, it's completely decoupled.
Exactly.
So that's the framework's business then.
Yeah, it's framework.
Completely. Okay.
Yep.
And I can feed it Markdown, MDX, and HTML.
If you'd want to, I think you typically want
but there
to
wouldn't be
like
an advantage.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I would probably call it a wrap here for the demo part. Maybe if you're looking into a more specific feature set, I'd be maybe coming back to that. But I would for now suggest we're actually diving into the Effect.ts specific parts. Yeah, if there are any questions, please bring them up. But for now, I'll close this examples repo, and I'll also close the dev server. And we're looking into the actual.
I have
packages.
one. I have one question actually. How does it work with? I mean, if you're deleting files, are you gonna delete files correctly in the end folder, the compiled output, or like TypeScript, for example? I have to, if I remove a file, I have to clean up the build.
I think that should be the case. Yeah.
I can see that.
Cool. So let's look into this. So overall, this entire repository, it's all just like one monorepo consisting of multiple packages for the monorepo management. I'm using Yarn 2 or Yarn 3. And then basically just TypeScript and the TypeScript setup that Effect.ts requires. I'll explain more about that in a second. From a user point of view, what you would need to install as a package is Contentlayer, and if you're using Next.js, I also recommend the Next Contentlayer package. From an implementation perspective here, this Contentlayer package is basically just exporting various sub packages, which we're now looking. This is for the sake of convenience for the user, and these are the packages that we now gonna look into. Contentlayer is built in a plugin oriented way. That means we have particularly around the concept of a source, we have various plugins. So here, for example, we're seeing a source for Contentful, we're seeing a source for files. There's also a experimental source for Sanity, which is another headless CMS. we've so far interacted with Contentlayer from the Next plugin perspective, but Contentlayer also has a CLI, which does exactly the same. The Next.js plugin is just there for the sake of convenience. But I think the CLI might be a good entry point to think about. Just also demonstrating what that would do. So the Yarn Contentlayer CLI here, let's take a look, has a build command and a def command. Def is basically the same as build, but with a watch mode. Let's go into a smaller example. So for example, the starter one, Yarn content layer, not later, build. So this is now doing its thing. So let's take a look at the CLI, how this is working. So Contentlayer, the bin here is just importing Contentlayer CLI and importing this run thing from it and then running it. Now let's take a look at that. So here we have Contentlayer CLI and then index.js. And now we're seeing some effect stuff. So now we're on track. So let's take a look here. I'm right now for kind of like
example, now one of the latest entry in the ecosystem is a port of Zio CLI.
I just wanted to mention. So here as a CLI framework's very lightweight. I'm using Clipanion. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's by, if I'm not mistaken, by the author of Yarn, Mile. And it's actually really nice to use. There's many CLI-ish libraries and frameworks, and I haven't fallen in love with any particular one yet, but this is one of the better ones I've used. But there is now also an addition in the Effect ecosystem called Effect CLI. I think by someone called
I think it's Max Brown, which should be in the call actually.
I might port this actually. And Max seems to be here in the audience. Let's take a look into, we just
maybe another, just mention it. It would be nice to have like another session of these effect times in trying to port these to Zio CLI if Max wants to.
Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. So let's take a look at the build command. Build command extends a base command, and just that we understand what the space command thing is doing. Let's put this side by side here. The space command is just extending, well, object-oriented programming is extending another command, which then comes from.
Which I should mention, I'm not against in general. I have really nothing against
it has its place. So the entire point of like the space command here is to encapsulate a couple of like common things across the entire CLI. So for example, since Contentlayer has this config, here's a config path, and so on. And then the other thing specifically for Effect.js is that we're trying to provide a more effect native entry point for each command. So by default, Clipanion has this execute method that you need to implement, and
they become like your main functions for
exactly. And here I'm basically just delegating this to execute save, which is where we're finally in effect land. So this is our entry point. And then each command.
I see there that with execute safe, you also have ot.stracer. So I guess you're also providing the tracing facility through that.
Exactly. Yep. So that might actually also be a good point to look into in a second. So yeah, and then each command. So for example, here also the def command is just implementing this execute save. And here calling the respective kind of like business logic of the overall machinery. So here,
Johannes, one thing here on the right side, in line 34, it seems you're using top calls and upper honest. appears that top cause cannot catch the interruption causes. That also reproduces in Zio. So it might be intended behavior. I would suggest moving that to a t.run promise exit and just check left or right in the exit side.
Okay, that's a great point. I've actually prepared a little notes document here where we can keep track of these change suggestions. So I might actually just note this down.
Yeah.
So here, instead of this, let's close this.
I worked for a while under the assumption that it was catching interruption causes, but apparently it's not like that even in Zio.
So here, use t-run promise exit. Cool. I'll try to like make a first vertical slice at everything, and then I think we can maybe I've shared the link with you for this Notion document.
Yeah, if I have anything, I'll add
to take some notes, and then we can go through everything. Cool. So right, one interesting point maybe as well to already go into a little bit is like here I'm providing a layer. I suppose most of you who are interested in effect have heard of like what a layer is. And here we're providing a layer for tracing, for OpenTelemetry tracing. I'm a big fan of OpenTelemetry tracing. That basically gives me it's kind of like, you can think about it if you're not familiar with it as like a better console log that gives you like a nice trace view of your executed application after you run it. So let's I can give you a quick example of this. I've actually have here a infra folder with Jaeger, so we can here Docker compose up Jaeger as well as this booting. Jaeger is developed by Uber and is a OpenTelemetry backend. So this gives us a nice UI for OpenTelemetry. So I think we should be able to, let's open this. Yeah, so this is Jaeger. And with that now in place, I think the next time I'm running this, this should automatically send things to OpenTelemetry, Contentlayer CLI. And now we're seeing here our execution. And so this is, in my opinion, really, really useful once you're like getting a bit used to it. So this gives me an entire view of like what has happened. So the overall command took 300 milliseconds to execute, and now we're seeing it broken down into what has happened. So this is our entry point, build command, execute save. So this is here what we've just been looking at. So this is our entry point. From there on, we're starting to kind of like take note of what's going on. And this is also here, this OpenTelemetry with span, that's exactly what we have here. So this trace here allows us to better understand
that wraps the execution of the child. So if you have any form of error, it's correctly traced and rendered in the telemetry side, and everything works as expected.
Okay, exactly. Yep. So now let's take a look into like how the various pieces, I mean, Effectius, one major benefit of it is like that you can compose a bigger program out of smaller pieces very nicely. So one part of the program here is getting the config. We also see it here. Getting the config, it actually takes the longest part in the entire execution here. There's room for optimization. but overall, I think it's still all right. Yeah, we can, so getting the config means here in this specific example, let's take a look at it one more time. Here we're in the starter. So when we're in this directory and running this command, then this automatically tries to look for this Contentlayer config ts. And then it basically tries to like get an export statement, gets basically this source code that it can run and get this information out of it. And given that it's in TypeScript, and I wanted to make it so that it can be in TypeScript, that it's nice to use, but don't have to bother you with setting up like TypeScript build step and so on. I'm doing that for you. And yeah, that's basically what's happening here. And we're seeing this is already broken down.
I can ship a JavaScript one if I want to take over.
Exactly. Yep. So this would just work out of the box with Init.js as well. And as we've seen here, we can provide our own config path here. Oh, it's not in the help message, but oh, there it is. So you can provide your own config path here. And we can already here see roughly like how it's working. It's gonna read this file. We're seeing here the file path is this. Let's take a sec. Give it a second. Need to understand myself again. Let's take a look in the source code. What's going on? So here, let's click into get config. Notice core get config. This is now in a other, and like not the CLI package, but this core package. So let's take a look into this. And now there's even more effect stuff. So let's look at that. What's going on here? So here first we're we're delegating here to get config watch. The reason what this is doing is that overall Contentlayer is built to support streaming and a watch mode. So that means as we have here Contentlayer build, and we also have Contentlayer dev. So Contentlayer dev would basically do the same thing, but it would not stop after the first run, but it would watch for file changes. So it doesn't just watch for file changes in your content files, but it also watches for file changes in your config file. And this is exactly why we also have this get config watch here. And if we're calling Contentlayer with the build command, we don't want it to watch anymore. We just want it to run once. So this is why, and this is a model as a stream. This is why we're just taking the first event or whatever a thing in a stream is called.
At some point in time, you had like the problem that you were setting up the watchers even if you wanted only a single build. Did you solve that in any way, or it's
right?
Still...
So yeah, Michael is already pointing at one thing, which is if you're building something that supports kind of like this dual mode of like just a single run and watching, and by watching you're just delegating to running by the single run you're just delegating to the watch and stopping after first event, then you might still, and in this case I think I still do it, I do set up the watchers and then killing it right away afterwards. So I think we can save a bit of work here that the computer needs to do by not even setting up the watcher in the first place, but I haven't.
Because ideally you could have like a configuration parameter, and if that configuration parameter is like set it up to be a single run, then you don't set up the watchers, but you emit a single event, and then you close down the stream. You let the stream complete. Like instead of taking one, you always take everything, and it's just a stream of a single output if it runs in build mode, and if it's a stream of n outputs, infinite many outputs, if it's running in watch mode. I'll make a note for that.
Awesome. Yeah, I haven't done that yet, as there were like a couple of bigger fish to fry at that point, but that's very, very true. Again, whenever you see this OT with span, this is basically when you see that. And here we even have like these attributes. This is when it's gonna appear in OpenTelemetry. So this is what gives us this with like this current working directory and so on. So I won't get too deep into this, since at this point we're also basically just delegating this to ESBuild. But I want to get a bit more through this here, since like now we're calling this generate.pkg. This generate.pkg, this is actually doing like all the work that you'd expect. So that means like it reads the source, either like your local source files or contentful, etc. It turns all of that content into data, and then it persists that data into, as we've seen here, into this directory. So this .pkg, this is what I mean with that. So let's take a step out of this again, and let's look into core generate.pkg. So that's what we're doing here. Let's look into this. Here we're still in the core package. So let's take a look what's happening here. You'll notice the same pattern as before with the config and config watch. We have the same pattern here, where this just calls the stream and takes the first one. This is because we're coming from the build command. If we're looking at the def command, let's put this on this side. Then notice here we'd be calling get config watch, and then generate.pkg stream. This should also be stream or watch and watch. So it's quite straightforward. Yeah, you basically just need to, in this case, you're dealing with a single effect. And in this case, you're dealing with streams from bottom to finish. We'll take a look more specifically into the streams in a moment, but I want to take first a full take through that, or full vertical slice. So let's take a look at our trace and see what to expect here. So what to expect, we're creating a directory, we're reading some files. There's some caching going on. In order to make something fast, got to do caching. So Contentlayer does caching, and that again makes stuff more complicated and error prone. So, you know, like 2 hard problems with computer science. And then we're fetching all the documents, and then later we're turning these documents into files and writing them after all. And so, yeah, quite straightforward. Let's take a look into how this is working. So looking at generate.pkg again. And now we're like already switching over into stream mode, since Contentlayer supports that. And yeah, let's take a look what's going on here. So as mentioned, Contentlayer supports multiple plugins. So at this point, it's basically it gets the source plugin injected, and now we need to, so the source plugin we're getting out of this config, and each source plugin, you see it here from the signature, has a function or an effect to provide the schema and to fetch the data. Providing the schema is basically that stuff here that we get, like the structured information about the content, and then fetching the data is looking to all of these content, to all of these pieces of content and getting the data. So let's take a look at how this is working. Here, we're doing this in parallel. So we're getting the schema, and then we're creating this artifacts directory. Let's take a look at a concrete implementation for providing the schema. So here we could now look into one of the sources. I'll show you the source for the files. So let's look into this. Let's look into the entry point here. So the entry point make the source plugin returns a provide schema and a fetch data. So if we're looking into this make core schema, we're basically getting in these document type defs, which is basically just turning this representation here into something that like this core, like the schema, the way how the schema is described for a source file. This is like for try to be as convenient to use for a user. And then core itself has its own understanding of a schema, which is a bit more verbose and easier for me as the implementer to use. So this is all that this is doing. So here we're getting back this schema definition, or sorry, not yet. Yes, sorry. So here we're getting a effect that allows us to get that. And then we're basically starting this. We're starting to execute this effect. And we're at this point from a single effect starting to turn this into a stream. So we're kicking off a stream here. And the stream is, if you've worked with streams in effect, they are, streams have like, it's basically like an effect, but it can return A's multiple times. What I want, but in the case of an error, the entire stream dies. What I wanted, because you saw this before when Contentlayer runs in dev mode.
Sorry, there's an interesting question. And what's the benefit of using sync.gen when creating the schema?
Good point. So this might be a bit of a special case here. Typically resolving the schema. So maybe a better example is for Contentful, actually. So when we're looking into this for Contentful and providing the schema, provide schema here, here's actually an effect. For Contentful, we need to call like HTTP endpoints and stuff and like do it. Therefore, it's asynchronous and therefore an effect. Here, in this case, it can be synchronous because we're just mapping over data structures. So this is why I've used sort of like effects little brother, which is sync, which is in.
But do you have any case where you are running the computation synchronously, or you always end up calling it from within an effect?
I think further up, we're again dealing with it as an effect. I think we're using here. We might be using generators. There's like some point where we're basically turning where we're treating the synchronous again as an effect.
Yeah, in that case, it's a little bit more performant to just use effect directly. It's using sync, you have to jump onto basically the fiber of effect has to pass down the context of execution to the sync driver. So there is a shifting of the execution.
Okay, that's great to know. So basically, at this point here, where we're using sync gen, I could basically just use effect gen.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So I guess that should just work in the same way. Great. Any other questions up to this point?
No.
All right. So where were I? Yes, I was about to explain how my stream usage here is a bit special. Since we saw it before when I ran the dev mode of Contentlayer, so watches for changes in the config and watches for changes in the content. What I want is I want to, in the same way as like if you're running a Next.js app and you have like a typo somewhere, the entire process doesn't just crash and say you're an idiot, but it like it treats that problem as a value and shows you like, hey, here's like it live refreshes, shows you here's a problem. It waits until you fix the problem and then it live reloads with the right example again. And I want to do the same here with Contentlayer. So if you have a bug somewhere, let's say you're missing a required field for a piece of content, or you might even in your Contentlayer config have a problem. I don't want to just die like and crash the entire process, but I want to basically up to a certain point catch the problem, and then I want to print out a useful error message that describes what the problem was, that you can fix it and watch for changes, and therefore have like a nice provide a nice foundation for the user to iterate on. So yeah, this is basically where normal streams would just on the first error that occurs would just die. It would just allow for multiple values like these A things here to pass through.
Because to be clear, it's in a normal stream, when you have an error, you have semantics to be able to recover from that error with other streams. So it would not be possible to have this sort of semantic and in parallel to allow multiple errors to occur or errors not to be final. Because for example, when you have an error, you have to catch it and handle it. If you have an error, you catch it, you handle it, but the initial streams continue to emit, you end up multiplying streams. So for this case, Johannes has chosen to encode it as an output value and manage a stream of either. One consideration might be if we may be able to move it instead to be an environmental service. Well, with your stream creation, if you have an error, you just fire a message into an environmental service that collects the error, that would allow you to use the plain stream of values rather than a stream of items. And I guess that links into another question that was before. If you are using your own version of effect, you are using a proxy around effect to add a little bit of combinators that
right.
That are not
maybe
that
now that you've already teased at it, maybe that's a good moment to show that all of like these little effect imports, T or OT or S, I'm importing all of that from this place here, Contentlayer utils effect, which is another package in here, utils source effect. And why I'm doing this, and instead of importing directly from effect.ts core or whatever other package, is for a few reasons. One is I can structure the imports and exports in a way that like how I like. I think other community members, I think Patrick, for example, I think is doing the same. And might be again a different story once the Fluent API might see the light. But until then, this is the pattern I'm going for, which has the benefit that I don't need to like I can consolidate all the dependencies in this utils package, which I'm doing here. So this utils package has effect.ts core, OpenTelemetry node, etc. So all of this is consolidated.
Another point here is you're linking effect as a dependency that has a strong tie on version number. And if one consumer of the library would also be using effect, you would end up with two effect versions.
Yeah.
Yeah. That should probably be
that's a good
peer
point.
dependency.
I should probably make it a peer dependency, but a peer dependency that is treated optional. So that basically means like if the end user doesn't have it specified, that they don't get a warning.
How is it? How can you do that?
That I think I'm doing that, for example, for ESBuild in here. So ESBuild here is a peer dependency.
Oh, optional, nice.
And what this means is like if someone has ESBuild in their package, they, as long as it has this range, it's all good. If they don't have it, then basically just picks this up and ignores that it was a peer dependency. Right. So going back to my little effect.ts helper. So one benefit is, given I have a monorepo of different packages, I don't need to duplicate this to all the dependencies of my little sub packages, but I can just have it in one place. And the other is that I can, in here, in my own little entry point for this, I can kind of like in a soft way override some of the, I guess the right term is combinators and exports of effect.ts. And by override, I mean mostly that I can add my own little helpers and access them from t-dot for effect, for example. So here I have like t.log, which is like a nice convenience function for console logging, or yeah, various other parts that have been useful for me. And on stream, for example, given I have this stream over either values, I have created a whole bunch of like little helpers for me for that. But as Mike pointed out, a valid alternative would be to still have just a stream over values and have the error channel for something really catastrophic, and have an environment that is responsible for printing. Might actually be a cleaner implementation, and already a great takeaway for me from this stream. Pausing here for a second to see whether there's some questions.
There is one, it's more related to effect, and it is if there is any thought of adding the console to the default environment similar to Zio. Yes, it's going to be part of the changes we make for while we finish porting the Zio 2.0 combinators that also have integrated logging. So it's going to take a while longer, but there is a plan for it.
Notice here that like for this use case of using effect.ts, I'm building like a tool for others, but you can think about it both as a tool and as an application in itself. I want to keep console log here as kind of reserved as like user facing. So anything that's more like for me to like understand and debugging, etc., I like use mostly Jaeger for that. So when I'm, for example, like reading a file here, instead of logging the file path, and then just like when I run it when I need it, and I comment in the console log.
Way more precise. It's way more.
Yeah, I can basically all keep it on, and I can see it. I can look at it if I'm longing for knowing it. So this is Michael. You asked about like my little helper library for effect. I'm doing this in all the projects where I'm using effect, and it's quite nice. And it allows me to enrich or extend.
Which I would say it's a common thing to do if you're using effect in like a little bit more of a mid to advanced level. It's kind of classical to have those, they're called preludes. Everybody has their specific flavoring, there's more preferences, and usually you have these packages to adapt. Very common thing to do.
Exactly.
By all means.
So yeah, this is where we have like the stream of like these errors or this generate value. Here I even hope that there is actually never an error thrown here. And this generate info that is like, this is not returning the actual generated data. It rather along the way persists sets to files to this .pkg. But this generate info is basically it's for the build command itself with this generate info where we're just logging this. So log generate info. Here we're basically just saying generated that many documents in Node modules content layer, which we've seen here. Right, so briefly going a bit further through this just to understand what's going on. So here we're getting our schema with the schema and this target directory. Target directory basically means if we haven't before created this .contentlayer directory, that this would create it. Notice that for all of this, we get like nice errors. So for example, we're getting a make dir error, and we can treat all of that nicely. And yeah, then we're fetching the data. Fetching the data, the result of this is a cache item. This cache item is then written to disk. And yeah, and that's really that's really all this is doing. And the implementation complexity is kind of like outsourced to the individual sources, to like the source for reading from like local markdown files, or to the source from Contentful. For sort of like I'm looking forward to building a source for Notion as well, so you can treat Notion as like your little CMS for blog posts, etc. And yeah,
and how do you load up one of those I call it plugins in userland?
Yeah, so this is like you said in userland. So you're doing this like in the config. It's part of the config. So here you're saying, okay, I'm using source files. Make source, and again, this part is being picked up by this get config part of core, not effect core, but Contentlayer core. So here in this get config, here we have a config path, the file path, and we are resolving that. We're literally compiling that, importing it, and then taking the imported thing and returning it. So, and that again is the thing that actually took a bunch of time, where it took that time actually. Let's look into it. It's interesting.
In this design, your source still uses effect, and you are compiling your source with effect as an external. So everything, when you integrate it back in your main process, everything still like link up.
Exactly. Like assuming you have like JavaScript code there that makes sense. So for example, like that, if it's compiled by ESBuild, should be good. Is already wired up that like it's kind of like defensively built, that it's not using the most cutting edge like ESM whatever. But it's like tries to pick like a solid foundation for the importing. And then if you're using like any dependencies in there, it would just assume that these dependencies are provided by your package manager. So if you think about it as part of your project, then you're golden. That should be fine. Yeah. I think one interesting aspect of this that I would also like to quickly show off is if you're going, you saw like these error messages before, where like if I forgot a required field, etc. That was really important for me that I like this, for example, that like if there's a problem that where is there a problem, what can I do to fix it, etc. That is not just saying like, hey, error and like good luck, but I want to provide like useful error messages. And there's a whole bunch, and this is where Effect.ts has been so crucial for me, because like in the source, in the implementation, I need to deal with a happy path and a not so happy path. And the not so happy path, this is where I already have the opportunity to semantically distinguish what is going wrong. And instead of just ignoring it, which most JavaScript developers unfortunately do, but instead of just ignoring it, but actually creating an error case for that captures all the context that's useful for that. So for example, if there is a field that's not defined in the definition, what is the name of the field? What is the value of the field? In which file did this occur, etc. And so for each of these cases, I have created, or like my goal is for each of these cases, by now I've like covered as many as I could think of. I have created error cases. So let's take a look at them. They're actually specific to the source providers. So if you have that, that's like specific to the
and you have like
files.
The source provider provides some sort of rendering it to a stringified.
Exactly. So let's take a look at that. So for the source files, here we have a directory of errors. So let's take a look here. So here we have 230 lines of errors. It's better than nothing. And so we see here a bunch of different error cases. So we see here invalid front matter error, or invalid markdown file error, or invalid whatever. And also like missing required fields error, or extra field data error, etc. And each of these contains all of the information that is useful when dealing with the error somehow. And I've also built myself this little like I'm not going to pretend to pronounce it, but an error that you can aggregate. And what this means is like I have this like render headline and render line. This is because I want to, for all of these errors, I don't want to just like have hundreds of lines of like error, like for every error just like printed out with a stack trace or whatever, but I wanted to nicely aggregate all of this that's nice to consume. And so I've built this little aggregate error thing here. And the best way to look at this is probably through a test. There are tests. Yeah, just scrolling through this, like here's like a simple case where it print 4 errors for this specific error category, but this can also, or here it would truncate these errors if it's too many, or if you want to print out all of them, if it's verbose, you get all of them. And for a bunch of different categories, and it categorizes these errors like this. So that was really important for me. And again, I couldn't have done that if I wouldn't have like nice error handling as Effect.ts allows me to do it. And then on top of it, and this was why in here, why I needed the stream of hold on.
Stream of widers.
Here, why we needed a stream of errors or valid values is because errors are also configurable in for Contentlayer. So depending on like your content that you have, and especially let's say you're moving from like an old site that might use something like Jekyll or so to Contentlayer and Next.js, and it might be that you literally have like thousands of pages. Like for example, the Gatsby docs has literally thousands of pages or thousands of pieces of content, and you might not want to you might not want to touch all of them and like clean them up. Now you can actually in your Contentlayer config, you can configure this here. So you can say here, let's actually make this do this like.
Okay, so if I have an extra field, just ignore it, or if
exactly. So let's take a look at this. So here we're saying found problems in one of two documents. So we have this pre-rendering file here. Let's look at this here.
or
so
you have
here
some other field.
Some other field. But like again, if we get rid of this, it's happy. If we re-add it, it's unhappy. However, we could, for example, also say, what if we're missing an important field? Then it says it's missing this field. And it could also be that like we actually like this bothers me that it's like printed here with this extra field. So we can now configure this and saying here on extra field data, we want to just ignore it. And this is again where the config watching comes in to play. Here we say we detected that the config has changed, we recompile it and re-execute the entire thing, and now this is gone. However, we could also
and this is to here it's still using the stable stream module.
Yes.
We also have the experimental one.
Yep, exactly. I've been starting off with the experimental one, and then I think it's been too experimental, and I've like been hitting a few
it has been a little bit too experimental.
But I'm looking forward to switching once that's no longer experimental. But yeah, to show you like there's also more extreme. The default here is Wern. There's also more extreme option. Let's say we never ever want that. We can even choose to fail. And if it's set to fail, like this actually stops the entire process. And we can also do this for missing or incompatible data, where we had like the skip Wern by default and so on. And there's also an option for unknown documents. So we don't need to get into all options now, but the point is error handling is kind of like hard enough to build, and Effectias makes this possible, but really, really hard is to make the error handling behavior configurable by the user. And that's what's being done here. So yeah, there's various places where it could dive a little bit deeper, but maybe, and I think we should also like wrap this up in the next 10 minutes or so. Maybe now is a good time for questions and some reflections from Michael, from you, or from others.
Yeah, I can start with a little bit of a reflection. It's honestly quite an impressive undertaking, and it's a modular system. It's doing very, very complicated things, and in principle, like you described, you have like configurable error behavior and dynamic plugins, compiling. So it is very, very, very complicated, and I'm so happy to see and look at the code, and it's still understandable, even though I've never looked into all of the details. I know you talked to me a little bit about Contentlayer before, never in those details, and there are some design choices that, as you said at the beginning, that they could be improved. But I'm extremely curious, for example, to see how this might play out in ZOCLI, with the port of ZOCLI, because that's one part of the integration where currently like have this independent thing using console log to provide structure logging. There is probably another aspect that we might improve in the future with some libraries of the ecosystem. And then there are some design notes that we have been taking, and I see that you've made a lot of combinators in streams. Most of that is needed because you're using the providers. Mm-hmm. So ideally, if we are able to simplify that model a little bit, you can cut off a decent amount of complexity from your side of the code.
Yep.
Not that this is a bad way, to be clear, this would be the classical way, like you would do it in a normal functional programming context, where you have multiple transformers. You would just use transformers to stack the either and the string together without having to create the module yourself.
Yep.
But yeah.
I think, like you pointed out already, I think the biggest simplification I could make here, without sacrificing functionality, is instead of using a stream of ethers, like my initial design was that I had these errors actually on the error channel. Kind of, my assumption was that errors in a stream are also just values, and the stream survives an error. However, what you've suggested makes a lot of sense to me, that in the environment, I would basically just have like a special error logger.
Sort of collector service, error
Exactly.
collector, some sort of, you delegate basically to the caller the requirement to handle.
Exactly. And at the point where like the stream here, there's actually just relatively few pieces that really necessitate this being the stream. The most here is basically just fetch schema. That is the stream itself. All the other pieces here, this is an effect. This is an effect. So it's basically just here, this being a stream. And I can basically in here, I could like access the environment, like error logger, and I basically just pass it in there. The error logger itself is aware of the error configuration mode. And then I could simplify this a lot again. Like, since it's all of these special combinators like chain map either right, that's a little thing that I had to build because I wanted like a specific combinator that would like, yeah, have like chain a stream, and then also over the right value of the stream. And I can like simplify this a lot again. So yeah, that's a very welcome suggestion. The other thing that's has been implemented in a very naive way so far.
A very low-hanging fruit can also be the swapping of like s.take one and configure the watchers. Just make like a configuration flag. I have a single stream which is either producing multiple values or it's producing just one.
However, it feels a bit like it's a bit redundant to like right now it's very simple. And
it's like it's either configure the watchers or not configure the watchers. So it is really a configuration on your whole stream.
Fair. That's a valid way to look at it. For me, it felt a bit like exposing implementation internals of that and leaking that to the outside. But on the other hand, like setting up the watcher or not is really like, I'd have to measure whether that contributes a lot, but I think it's probably like less than 5.
If it doesn't, I don't think you should care.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing that I would like to see maybe in another session, that I would like to see whether effects can provide me some nice abstractions or utilities to improve. There's like a part that I'm less proud of here. It works, but it's not as beautiful as it could be. So for the source files plugin here, in the fetch data, like this needs to, like, if you have a ton of content files, like in the Gatsby docs example, like you have thousands of markdown files, and I don't want like on every change recompute all of them. So I want to do as little work as necessary. I want to do caching, but I also want to do like caching in a way that
because currently, if you find one change, you recompile everything.
No, right now, it's like if there's one change in a markdown file and the others have been calculated before, I'm just going to recalculate that part. And this will also just regenerate one JSON file. And therefore the Next.js app is also just going to like be updated on that single thing. So it's like these pieces fit very, very well together, and there's like it's by being simple, very efficient.
Yeah, I don't think I understand the last point you made on caching.
Yeah. So the way how fetch data, which this is where the caching implementation needs to.
Oh, it's within the fetch data. Got it. To resolve
Exactly.
data dependencies.
Since fetch data is like, yeah, that's just knowledge that can be just implemented in the source. So the way how I've understood it so far.
and here, like Max suggested in the comments, I think FFTS query might be what you're looking for, because it is precisely to like interpret pipelines and batching over dynamic queries, which seems precisely what you have.
Yeah, I should look into that. I've been so far been punting on learning.
It's not too scary.
Effect query. There are no docs yet.
There is one test where you have queries defined and batching defined. It's literally a copy paste from the test.
All right, I've been running into use cases for effect query left and right, so I'm sure the time has come for me to very soon to look into it. It might be a great future effect time session, actually, to look at something that's naively implemented, not using effect.ts, and then see, or not using effect query, and then seeing how it could be simplified, improved, things.
No, I mean, I think we can definitely schedule that. One other suggestion was from a member of the audience. So I would love to watch someone moving the IDER to a collector service. So that would be another idea for probably an effect time if you are up to it.
Yep. Yeah, so the last point I just wanted to show here of something that I think is worthy of improvement is the way how a caching here is implemented. Is that I have, where is it? I have a cache object, which is, which is injected here, and where is it even coming from? Yeah, I think it's coming from here. So load previous cache from disk. So this is when I'm firing this up, that it like even the caching even survives runs, which is yeah, it just speeds it up and avoids unnecessary work. And so here it loads up that cache, the previous cache from the disk. So it can, depending on whether it already existed or not, can return a cache or undefined. This should probably be an option. But that aside, we have this cache thing here now. And then the way how I'm working with the cache is really not very applaudable. So here I'm basically just treating this in a very mutable way, and deleting something out of it and then returning this cache.
And most importantly, you don't have any coordination if like multiple places are trying to resolve the same thing. Like if it's either in the cache and you get it,
yeah,
or
so
you start two different requests. And
the point being, this is, I think, also like a good candidate for some refactoring. It works, to my knowledge, but I would like to see whether there's like a better implementation of this.
I think that there's two things we could look at: either using the effect query, or there's an in-progress port of Geocache, which defines fine-tuning policies on caches.
That sounds great. Yep,
it would be useful to look at both.
Cool. I would probably call it a day for the deep dive session here. Yeah, feel free to reach out to me on, I'm on in the Discord, the effect Discord. If you Google my name, you'll find also other ways how to get in touch with me. give Contentlayer a try for your website or whatever. It's still under development, but like the API should be stabilizing. It's probably more like if you're into Effect.js, it's probably like more mature than Effect overall. Like, don't mean to step on any toes here, but it's like also doing way less. So yeah, feel free to give this a try.
And especially it's targeting a very different audience.
Exactly. So there's already people who've created issues. I'm trying to my best to address these, and yeah, feedback always welcome. If you're on the verge of like trying to see, is Effect.js for you worth investigating or not? It's currently quite challenging to just get started just by the lack of learning resources, but that's getting better by the day. And the best thing you can do, I think, is join the Discord and ask questions. People are very welcoming and helpful there. Yeah, hopefully through Contentlayer, but if you're not using it, but if you're just looking for an example project that's using Effect, hopefully that's helpful to you. And yeah, so that's it from my side. Maybe we have some closing questions.
No, not specifically. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks a ton.
Cool.
Thanks a ton, Johannes. Yeah, thank you very much. It's quite impressive what you've built, and I'm gonna be trying it out for a project of mine.
Awesome.
Term, so.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, it was a nice. I thought this was a nice way to kind of like give back a bit to you and the overall the community, since you all have helped me so much. And yeah, I hope this community grows nicely and progresses nicely. And I thought this might be a nice little way how I can help.
Absolutely. Lovely, guys. I think that's a wrap. If there are no other questions, I'm gonna put this in YouTube. Johannes mentioned there's a Discord channel. Feel free to join if you're not there yet. I'm gonna be putting that in the YouTube.
Awesome.
Links too.
And cheeky little comment at the end: if you're putting ads on the YouTube video and you're getting some money from it, please buy a microphone. I'll keep bringing.
Come on! I ordered a microphone and then I changed the idea at the last minute and forgot to buy it again. But I'm gonna have to.
All right. Otherwise, we have to crowdfund it for you.
Come on, it's not a funding issue.
All right.
Great.
See you, everyone.
Thank you very much. See you, everyone.
Bye.
Yes. Bye.